So the Wheel of Time, which has been adapted by Amazon Prime Video, is ready to release its third season of its live action. And we have to talk about this, Lucas, because I am disappointed in how this is turning out. The first season was, a bit of a shambles. The second had a few moments that I liked, and this one is shaping up to be probably the worst of the three, if the trailer that was released yesterday is any indication. I know you got a chance to look at it. What are your first thoughts?
I mean, my first thoughts when I saw the trailer was, you're ripping directly off of Lord of the Rings with the grand horn Susomi. Um, and then they followed that immediately by ripping off Kate Blanchett's Galadriel voice and laying out, the sort of mystical enchantress seer voice. So that was pretty poorly done. Wheel of Time can stand on its own feet with its own leitmotifs. So those were then from there, again, there's there is a strong identity to the Wheel of Times, to the series by Robert Jordan's. There are six characters who should be very recognizable, who should be um, should almost be like astrological symbols. But instead, it's just muddled. It's muddled. There is just pandering and hocus pocus. It's kids running around, uh, trying, but I don't know, failing. I didn't watch the second season, mind you, either. I couldn't make it all the way through the first season, and there was so little respect paid to. Yeah, I'm going to be that person. I know that there are decent adaptations, but they just tell their whatever story that they want. It felt to me like a woke millennial stab at a great, maybe the greatest fantasy, high fantasy sword and steeds series that's ever been written. And instead of digging into the meat behind the Wheel of Time, it just panders around in the costumes. But Rusty, you said you watched series 1 and 2. What did you think?
Um, it was an interesting series. I never really got too much into the books, so I don't really have a real basis to what they're going off of. Is was it true to the nature of the books, or did it go well with the storyline? And that's one of the things about something like these books is there were so many of them, and they're cult classics. Like people grew up on reading these stories one after another, and so it's hard to put something into comparison when it's already got that theme in your mind. And when you watch something like this, just kind of falls short of what you're expecting. And I think that they try to do what they can with it, but they just can't encompass so much of a storyline into a show, no matter how much time and effort they put into it.
Well, I'd say, having watched season one and season two, there was a moment in season two that I really adored. And Lucas, I think if you ever get a chance to see any part of it, it's the one where Rand's mother, who is the Aiel, just completely dismantles several fighters that she's fighting. I don't even think it's a scene that appears in the books, but it really does do well to show like one aspect of a character that we never really get a whole lot of time with the book, but it was actually decent. But it's the only one that's memorable for me. But I would agree, Lucas. They have completely just trashed what should be very recognizable characters, and they have turned them into these weird incarnations of them. And I know that Rafe Judkins, who is the showrunner, kind of came out and said, "Hey, we're not going to tell the story of the Wheel of Time. We're going to tell another turning of the wheel," which is something which is referred to in the books. Is that the wheel has turned many times, it will turn again, and sort of what the shadow wants is the breaking of that. It's one thing that's referred to in the books is that's what they want, is they don't want the wheel to turn anymore. They want this to end, this to be over, and all of the Forsaken talk about this. And so, this is what he came out and said. He's like, well, we're not going to tell this story, we're going to tell a different story. And that was like one of the first times when I kind of threw up in my mouth a little bit. It was like, I don't want another telling or another turning. I don't want your adaptation. What we in the fandom of these books want is the telling of the story that was written. Like, you don't need to use this as source material and then find your own way. Like, tell the story as it was written. And the one of the only redeeming things that I saw that came out of all of this was the little animated shorts. And I thought, gosh, if you're going to do anything with this series, just animate it, because then you can do it right and you don't have to worry about all of this stuff you're throwing in here to try and make it work, because this live action adaptation, I'm calling it, it's dead after this season. Like, they're going to cancel it.
Here's what really bothers me, because I actually think that's an interesting spin, haha, on the Wheel of Time, to tell it as if it is another another passing of these events and these chain reactions that occur over and over with slight, whatever, but somewhat of the pastiche of the whole series. But the thing that gets me is when I read, and if anyone is thinking about or has started, the Wheel of Time is 14, maybe 15, maybe 16, given all the prequels, probably 16 books, and they run, I have one right here, let me look, what do the page numbers, 600 pages, just casual light reading.
15 books.
50, is it 15? Okay.
Yeah, it's 15, including they released that new spring book, which was the one that preceded. It was the prequel. I don't think they're counting the compendium and some of the other books that were released. Those are just the canonical story set.
Gotcha. Well, I liked those compendiums, and I loved A New Spring, about Moraine and Lan Mandragoran.
Well, and see, they're kind of like the prime characters, even if you see the way that they presented these graphics as if this was their story more than anyone else's.
Right. And which again kind of drives me crazy, because again, going back to when I look at what they lost in carrying this over is the interplay between any of the characters. Like Robert Jordan has written, and my favorite thing that occurs is the dialogue and the back and forth, the playfulness between his characters, and whether that's the blacksmith Perrin Ibarra and his love interest Fail, whether it's Lan and any of the ladies who are interested in him, and no spoilers there, but that's what it misses. Because when I first saw the adaptation, I thought it's so muted. Like, it's so serious, it's so drab, it's so muted. Like, there is
Really, because I mean, partly what you get if you get into the second season, it is so sexual. I was just shocked by it, because that is not really present in the books. I mean, he was prudish in the way that he presented the material and was criticized for that. But the adaptation almost swings Game of Thrones style in just some crazy sex stuff that happens in this adaptation.
well, it's maybe not maybe not sexual acts, but the books are very flirtatious, high
They are, but I mean, in this, it's like every warder relationship is completely this way. And like when there are multiple warders, then they're clearly all just having sex, and the men are having sex with each other as well. It's just like, this is not in the vein of like what he wrote at all as his,
no.
background.
Yeah, that's well, interesting that they went there with the, gave themselves a permission to open up those kinds of relationships.
I think that was part of this, what you referred to is like how they intended to adapt this, but it definitely came out of the ground setting of Game of Thrones being very highly sexualized, and I don't know if they felt like that was what drew the audiences into that work of fantasy, or if it was other things. I personally don't think that's what made Game of Thrones compelling. I think in some ways it was a bit off-putting in how much there was in it and the ways that it was presented. I think it could have been a bit more tastefully done, but like this is just gratuitous and definitely not aligned with the story the way that I have read it in any way. Definitely there are some things that are alluded to, but like not in the way that it was done.
I love that we're talking about Game of Thrones in light or in as opposed to the Wheel of Time. Um, I've I began reading the Wheel of Time and Game of Thrones both in 1999, and and Robert Jordan sure churned out a lot more books than George R. R. Martin. I'll tell you that. But I used to think it was interesting to me that Wheel of Time was both earlier, like I believe it started in the late 80s.
Was
When you
it? Oh gosh, I seem to remember it being like 91. Let me look that up, but keep going.
Well, I know he was writing them in the late 80s and especially the early 90s. I didn't pick them up until I believe it was between books 8 and 9. The Winter's Heart was maybe the first published one that I caught. But
Yeah, 1990. You're 100% correct. He was writing it in the late 80s, and first book was published in 1990.
yeah, and to me, the Wheel of Time also is so very much very interesting. It is caught in the I mean, it is a post-apocalyptic um uh it is a post-apocalyptic world that presumes that the United States and Russia had a grand nuclear conflict, and that is explicitly stated. Um, uh, not as explicitly as you might expect, but if you can, if you could add some twists and tells as to um, you know what people emerging and without records might tell of that story a thousand or thousands of years later. Um, but it very much to me grappled with like notions of Western identity versus notions of Eastern identity. There's a lot of veins that run through that, but um,
And you told me something very interesting before. You said that the Shan, you said they're the remnants of what empire from our time?
oh,
Because
I
they're
would.
the insectoid ones that have the big helmets and whatever, right?
I mean, I always view. I mean, to me, oh, can I dare? Do I dare give such a plot spoiler? I will because it's.
Look, these books are so done and old. Let's forget the spoiler business. Like this isn't something people like. If you're coming to watch this show, you're coming to hear our take on it. So go for it, man. Like
Oh,
no worries about spoilers.
okay. Well, when I imagine in the map or where in the world this is taking in a world that's been sort of mashed around and reformed. But where was it starting from? I'm pretty sure that Wheel of Time, the map in which it occurs, Kyrian and all these different countries, is North Africa. And when I look at the Shanshan, I think, oh, that's the French. Their slurred way of speaking, and who he was hearkening to for the inspiration for the Shanshan is Napoleon, and Napoleon sort of fell
Interesting.
back.
I always got like an Eastern vibe, like it was like Chinese or something that this with the long fingers and the lacquered nails and some of the ways that they, burned incense and stuff. And
That that's lipstick on a French pig. Um,
nice.
yeah, it's a French pig. I mean, Arthur Hawkwing is Napoleon. Um, And you know, something else, by the way, I don't know, we should. Robert Jordan was a military tactician who taught at the Citadel. So, you know,
Yeah,
woven
so he was a military historian, right? Is that kind of
yes, yes, and not just a military historian, but also like a battle tactician. You know, somebody who taught the cadets, all of these different innovations that were brought through various battles through the history of mankind. So,
And so
uh,
none of this comes through in the show, by the way. Not a lick of it. So everything we're talking about now, it's like it's unrecognizable. And this season, we're moving into the Aiel Waste, and the thing that I could not understand at all about, like, as we're moving into the Aiel Waste, which is desert people, nomads, whatever, is they have dreadlocks. It's like, what is this show? What is the aesthetic? This doesn't even make sense.
yeah, I mean, it also misses out because you know there's a great blending of ethnicities of histories that Jordan does, and I think it's the map of Africa and North Africa too. And, and he borrows from all corners of the world and all corners of history and puts it back on that map and sort of fudges things around. But this series misses out on all of that, and it misses out on the sort of the the brilliance that Jordan uses in making the you know the realities of the map, like the desert people. They're very austere. They're very much water, about water wars, about sort of strange ferocity and how they fight over things, and then
And culture and rules, like they have these very specific rules about providing water and shade, and these ways that they react to each other, and the way that they fight amongst the tribes, and they have very prescribed rules, and just very dogmatic in the way that they will like defer to the elders, and it's very cultured.
well, and but when I look at all of that, I think of T.E. Lawrence and Arabia, the Bedouin and the Arab peoples of Arabia, and both uh, how ferocious they are in fighting and protecting their water rights, as told by T.E. Lawrence, but also how benevolent and caring they are in another hand, and Robert Jordan captures that beautifully. It's a counterpoint to the 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 wetlands and the fat lands and sort of the political intrigue that goes on in places. You know, there's other things that he did that I thought were amazing, and that you know there's in fantasy, like throw a rock and tell me how often you're going to come up with uh with powerful female characters. Maybe in Dune with the Bene Gesserit a little bit, but that's but I mean, how many females are there in Lord of the Rings? Let's start there.
Totally, and some of the other stories of the time, you probably think of like David Eddings and Terry Brooks. There are just not female characters like very prominent at all. So yeah, it's like a Dune, and this is probably the two primary series that feature women prominently.
Yeah, and then you turn, and it's not just the female Aes Sedai, the servants of man, Aes Sedai. There's an old language too, which is great. Um, uh, but the female Aes Sedai who have this sort of a power that not everyone has. Yes, they're powerful, but look to Egwene and Nynaeve, and who runs things in this little town? Is it the men who are busy working, or is it the women who have women's circle and tell the men what to do? And so Robert Jordan also very much plays with notions of political power and who is at the helm of society, uh, and that was also not that did not exist in this series of Amazon. And I thought, what a missed opportunity to grasp onto sort of the playfulness and um the playfulness and the power balance that he has so absolute much fun with through his books.
Well, and setting up like Elaine. I think Elaine in the power structure in, was it Carrie Ennan? Is that
Ky-
the
Kyrie Innan.
yeah, like how she and her brother Gawain, the way that she's the daughter heir. That is, I mean, tell me another story where there's a daughter heir. That completely turns it on its head, because it's not just the Aes Sedai, which there, as you get in further into the books, there were male and female, that they used to be this way. And so the story of how, the men kind of in their hubris went and did something without women, and then, were cursed for it, essentially. But you even have these other peoples who have an entire hierarchy that is not completely patriarchal. It's fascinating that, he brought a lot of these things into the mix.
Yeah, Elaine, the queens of the queens of Kyrian, also, because her mother, what's her mother's name? Elaine.
Morghese. Morghese.
Morghese. Morghese is the real, one of my favorite characters, even though I couldn't remember her name off the top of my head. Forgive me. The Red Queen. But yeah, he does so many, he plays with our the arrangements in society, so many ways. um and this animated series wanted merely to dress people up and have special effects in which you could freeze water or move dirt with air. um that was the only nuance that they picked up on. Sad. um so
Yeah, and thinking about some of the ways that it harkens to that we're in the future of a post-apocalyptic world. One of the things of, as they move throughout the world, and they're exploring and finding things, they find heaps of, our garbage, the artifacts that had been produced by this previous society that had survived and then still even worked. They're powered by the one power, and you, even as you're going about your daily life, and you think, gosh, what is it like to actually plug this toaster into the wall, and it does something, and you like, how does a society that doesn't necessarily have electricity relate to something like that? Like, this thing used to bake toast. Like, what does it do now? Nothing. And you just throw it on the ground. It's like, what does it do?
there's that part. And the age that we are in now, this age of modern, um you know wizarding devices, electricity or stuff, that's, they call it the age of legends in this whole, in this world of the Wheel of Time. um and I do love it when they uncover and they tell us a little bit more about this age. But it's also interesting to think about, how did people in medieval Europe think and understand the world. What was magic to them, and and are we going back to that in some way in the future? There's another plot device that is rampant, that is woven into this tapestry. There's also a great illusion.
Nice usage of woven and tapestry, because that's a
Oh,
frequent language in the Wheel of Time.
I mean, I'm often thinking of, I mean, he begins and ends so often with the tapestry and the fabric of life. Even, when we talk about law and going back to the French, we like talking about law is talking about the fabric of society. And much of the words that we have, tort law, the torts is a tearing of the social fabric. not meeting expectation. So, but yeah, Robert Jordan has this metaphor of the tapestry, which is incredible, and also even plays into the description and the understanding of the powers that the different characters can manifest. But then there's also this dream world, Telelon Riyadh, and I'm always fascinated in this dream world because in some ways I think of the dream world as being, how might he have been thinking about this dream world of possibility, um, and what happens there? And he started writing about it before the internet. He started writing about it before these, avatars and alternative, personalities and places, the realms that we stepped into, in in on the internet or in our computers. And I don't know. It's a fascinating piece of his world that I love too. I really like, and I like the way that, I mentioned Perrin before. Perrin is a, Perrin is part wolf. Perrin can speak with the wolves, and the wolves can enter the dream world effortlessly. Like our dogs can just fall asleep without having to work to do it. So, do you think about when you think about the dream world? Are you thinking, does that come to your consideration? That this was before the internet and before so much of this artificial world we had created existed?
Well, I, I guess the internet didn't come to mind as much for me when I was thinking about how they interacted in the dream world, because there were so many other dimensional aspects, like either like the first time that we encounter like this other reality is when they're in the ways, and like they're moving between these different places, and there's like this grid that's overlaid on the world where you can move between stuff. And so some of these things that are introduced early on sort of tell you that there's multiple planes of existence in the story. And so then when you're introduced to Tel Iran Riyadh for the first time, it felt pretty natural that this was happening. And then, like when they go into the Tower of Genji and encounter the snakes and the foxes creatures, there's a lot of sort of this overlay that they're in some kind of weird multiverse that exists, and that these things have been tapped into. So I didn't get as much of a sense of that just because it felt very multidimensional, like in the way that the whole story was laid out and these different parts of it that all played together.
Well, and I also think about the difference, when I'm in Telelon Riyadh in the Wheel of Time. I'm sometimes thinking about the, Game of Thrones, and there is, like, it seems to be concerned with very much this gritty reality, and like no magic except for something that nobody understands. And it's interesting to me that George R. Martin starts, um, Game of Thrones or the Song of Ice and Fire after, um, after the internet has really begun to take off, and we're already getting into, social networked sort of world. And it seemed to me it's not kind of a rejection of that social network, because both of them also very political, very much about, the people's actions not lining up with what people say and giving characters permission to lie.
Well, I know in many fantasy books, it harkens to Tolkien's work, which is magic is draining out of the world. In the Wheel of Time, magic isn't necessarily draining out of the world. In fact, it's like re-rising, because you've had this whole half of the magic users on the planet who have been sort of kept away from their power, and they're sort of waking up and coming back to it. So this, I think, was one of the first books that I read where magic was re-entering the world instead of draining out of it. I think a lot of fantasy authors copied Tolkien, and sort of magic was going away, and that they were on the last days of it, and that no one could really do it anymore. In these books, you certainly have lost a lot, and they're rediscovering it. And I think one of the things that really struck me as interesting was the interplay with the immortal creatures that exist. You know, the Forsaken that had been elevated to this this higher plane. They couldn't be killed, and the way that they remembered all of these old pieces of technology and lamented that they had to live in this backwater world. I loved those scenes. I thought that the bad guys in this series were pretty cool. They were really bad in some ways, and in some ways that you almost felt sorry for some of the characters, because it seemed like they maybe found themselves in a place that they hadn't expected, because they didn't know what they were doing when they drilled a hole in the Dark One's prison, and then all of a sudden they were like, oh man, this isn't what we expected to have happen at all.
Yeah, I really like the. I'm glad you bring up the Forsaken. Uh, I like how the the bad characters in the Wheel of Time see, you know, see how and why the world turns differently than our, especially our six protagonists, um, which are three boys and three girls, all from the same small mountain town from the middle of nowhere. Um, but even like they're not immortal. Or it's interesting to me that there are so many. The immortal characters are the archetypes, and that does not necessarily extend to these Forsaken. They've been bound in stasis for however long, but they wake up in, as if as if some of these human transcendentalists from San Francisco froze themselves and wake up in medieval Europe, 1,000 years in our future. So
Yeah, and as the story progresses and they progressively become thawed, and you find out that it was their proximity to the Dark One that sort of warped time. The time aspects that are brought into the Wheel of Time are somewhat interesting. I like that we kept the arrow of time. There's no time travel in this story, which I never really appreciate when there's time travel in a story. It seems like it's fraught with a lot of difficulties, but I think he navigates it well in saying that you can only move forward in time, and so there's this time bubble that exists near the Dark One, and it's almost like some kind of stasis field that they get thawed out from as this bubble recedes, and they start to, as they're closer to the edge, that they get out first. I think at some point that you start to have a super powerful bad guy that starts to fall apart a little bit. I kind of liked it better when there were these multiple different characters that were vying for supremacy and trying to get one up on another, and that the Dark One, the main bad guy, was encouraging this in some fashion. I liked that interplay. I thought that was pretty neat.
the desert, we spoke earlier of the desert people, and how hard and how violent, but also how strong their culture is. So they're called the Aiel, throughout the Wheel of Time. Um, what do you make? We find out very early in the books. I believe by book 5, we find out that the Aiel in this age of legends, um, were not a violent people, but actually a people of absolute peace, who practice,
Pacifists, yeah,
yeah,
pacifists.
pacifists, and they practice a doctrine that they call the way of the leaf, and singing the song, and there are remnants of them from that time who still exist and travel around in painted wagons, who are called tinkers, and remind me a lot of maybe gypsies in Europe, or the Romani. Um, but what do you when you are thinking about the Aiel and the difference of the forks in their past, and where they come to through those forks, what do you think about whenever you sit back and ponder that?
I think the Aiel are one of the most compelling races or classes of people that exist in the book. It's like as soon as you encounter them, they have this strong, fierce sense of honor. They're this warrior tribe that live in the desert. When Rand first encounters them, he's not up to the challenge, and so he has to adopt these ways, and he becomes adopted as their prophet savior. But in many ways, he's not really ready for it, and so he's got to learn from it and grow. And I think it's what is it? The Shadow Rising is the book where they're really in the Aiel Waste, and that's actually where we're at in this season, which I was most hopeful for, that they would get this right and that this would be kind of fun and it would be this great turning of the series, and it doesn't seem like it's set up that way. And I know that there's this scene where Avienda discovers that this was the case for herself. Now, she had heard it from Rand because he sort of blabs and tells everybody that they were Tinkers in the past, and that sets up this great cultural shock within the Aiel, because they have to come to terms with the fact that in the past that they had abandoned the way of the leaf, and that they were the ones that were really the despised ones, because there was this interplay between there were all the tribes that felt that they were doing it right, and then there was the Shido who were not doing it right, and that they had been the corrupted ones, and this infighting that had been happening, they felt they were on the wrong side, or that they were on the right side of this intertribal stuff that was happening. But now they find out that they're really on the wrong side of what their peoples had always believed in, and they had to come to terms with the fact that this is who they had been in the past, and they have to now embrace this warrior thing that they've become, or to abandon it and throw down their spears. And I thought that was a fantastic point of cultural tension that existed in these people, that when we first meet them, they're acclaimed for their wars, for their fighting, and they have to come to a this moment of introspection where they discover that this way that they've been acting is the antithesis of what their people had always believed, and that's not how it was for them. And when Avienda goes through the rings and discovers all of this stuff, and she gets to see her past and then her future of what happens to the Aiel after the events of the Wheel of Time, I think it's one of the greatest scenes in the book. Honestly, that's something that I stands out to me the most. So I really loved that interplay of how the Tinkers became the Aiel for the people who sort of rejected this pacifism, and became this great warrior nation.
Well, and I see Robert Jordan, right, trying to give this message to a Cold War society in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet republics, and leading into them. Um, that that we weren't always the we weren't always the people, or the answer was not always violence and, I'll use a phrase, American primacy. It seemed to me that Robert Jordan was very much trying to put forth that, to a world full of warhawks, that it wasn't it hadn't always been the answer before, and didn't necessarily have to be the answer going forward.
Well, I don't know. I mean, like, it doesn't really turn out very well for the Tinkers every time they encounter people who, don't take kindly to their pacifism. They get slaughtered. It doesn't really work for them. I think the message I took away is that there's a time to fight. It's not necessarily something that you should applaud, but like, you can't just take it lying down. And that's one of the things that they first encounter when the characters kind of end up with the Tinkers, is they're learning about their people, and they see them get slaughtered, and then one of them decides that he can't take it anymore, and he takes up the sword, and he's ostracized from his people for doing that, like turning on his
Oh,
culture.
I mean, the most conflicted of all the characters in all the series is Aram the Tinker. the tinker who picks up the pacifist who picks up a sword. You know, well, for that, I would say we'd have to get into a discussion about the culmination of what happens in the Wheel of Time, what happens in the cave of Shale Ghul whenever Rand steps in to fight the dark one, the evil one. But then we might give away too much. So I don't know though. I think that is the heart of the message that Jordan is trying to is trying to give to the world through such a great series. But if we delve into it, let's not do it here. We're at 40 minutes, and we got to give Rusty a chance to finish the other 14 books before we go there.
Well, I hope we don't have to wait for that, because Rusty has told us that he is not as much for reading books, but maybe the audio books will give him a chance to listen. I would love to talk about this a bit more in detail. So we're mostly reacting to the new season of the television series, which I think premieres, I don't know, in the fall or something like that. The trailer just came out, but yeah, I think we owe it to having a discussion about this book series in detail, because there's a lot here, and I know you and I are both big fans of the series, so we probably should just actually go into it in some detail and get our thoughts out there, because we both have a lot. I think that there's some things to say here which haven't yet been said. So there have been reactions to the book, but you and I need to give our own reactions to the book, I think.
Oh, I'm always down with that. And I think if you read any series, not even just fantasies, but if you read any series, again, I think Robert Jordan is speaking about that Cold War tension and about humanity today. It was a book that was written about the present, and the things that he has to say in it are incredibly insightful, foresightful. They will give you the ability, or more ability to digest the things that are going on in the world today, and to do it with humor and maybe a little grace. So yeah, I'm always game. When next time you want to talk about it, I'll be ready.
Okay, but as a last thing, your prediction: do you think that they're going to make a season 4? Do you think it survives this season? I know you didn't see season 2, but you saw the trailer. I mean, the trailer was
I
the
hope
best
so.
of
I
what
want to be
they
able to,
got.
learn the whole story. I need 14 seasons here.
Yeah,
Well,
I think
they're already into book 5 with 3 seasons, so probably if they were going to do this, they could get it done in 6 or 7, maybe 8, but at the most.
I mean, it depends on what the following is for you know whatever the goals are for this production team and for Amazon. I don't know.
I mean,
Because
at this rate, these characters are going to age out. Like Rand's going to be 50, 60 years old by the time they get this thing shot. I don't know what the last
I
season
be
draws, but
who knows, before long they might just be making AI episodes. And again, the beautiful thing, maybe they fall into stride and begin to realize that they don't have to um that 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 the art and the identity in the Wheel of Time is in the interactions, the extensive navel gazing dialogue between the characters. um that's to me where the magic is. So if they could figure that out and move it all to AI, and because I always thought that the Wheel of Time would be best carried like into a visual medium as a cartoon series.
100%. It should have been animated from day one. This is not the right way to approach this series, because you just have these characters that are going to age out. There's just no way to do this right and carry it, for the better part of 16 to 20 years, which is what it's going to take at this rate. So I just don't see how it's going to work, honestly. I'm making my prediction. If we had a poly market on this one, I would bet season 3 it gets canceled, because there's no way that this thing actually finds its footing at this point. It's been too long. It's not working, and I guarantee it gets canceled.
Okay, I'll take that bet.
All right. So we'll be watching to see what the reactions to the world are as this thing gets released and the fandom reacts, and we'll see if people really glom onto this latest season or not. But we'll catch you next time on FOMO.
All right. See you later.